What's up, everybody? Welcome to the best sci-fi TV shows on Netflix. I'm also going to be talking about fantasy shows and comic book shows, and I would love to hear what some of your favorite sci-fi, fantasy, comic book shows are on Netflix that we could all watch together right now. I'm going to give you my top 10. I also have an article where I share my top 10. If you want to skim through that, it should be in the description down below. I also want to let you know that last time my dog Gatsby leaned up against my tripod while he was sleeping and moved the whole screen. So just be aware that that could happen. If you've never seen Gatsby before, this is what the little Gatsby looks like. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's him sleeping away right down here by my feet. Definitely say what's up in the chat because I want to hear what your favorite movie or best TV shows are on Netflix, what sci-fi, fantasy, and comic book shows you're watching on Netflix, what you think are the best, because I want to watch some of those as well. What's up, Mary? Thanks for joining. Fortunately, the chat's working today. Last time I did this, the chat wasn't working, so it wasn't as interactive as I was hoping it would be. But I will jump into my list now. Again, if you want to see the link to the entire list, just click down in the description down below, and you'll be able to find it no problem. I have two honorable mentions. I had more movie honorable mentions than I have show honorable mentions. And the two show honorable mentions I have are both Marvel shows. I'm a pretty big fan of most of what Marvel did. The Defenders is one of mine. The Defenders is basically Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, and Daredevil, plus Elektra, coming together to fight together. They're taking all the different shows that have been on Netflix and they're coming to join forces. The Defenders is not as good as some of the other shows, and some of those are on the list. But it's worth watching especially if you like the other shows. It's decent. Luke Cage is also one of my honorable mentions. I love the style of Luke Cage. I love the cast. It's a bunch of fantastic actors, but the story was I thought the story started out fantastic. It didn't end as well in season 1 as I was hoping it would, and I didn't even watch season 2. But again, it's kind of worth checking out. But those are my honorable mentions. What's up, Jim? Nice to see you too. Definitely give me your guys' top 10 as I go through mine. If you have any honorable mentions, throw them out there. I'll get to. I'm going to go back and forth between the comments here and there. So if you have some that you want to recommend, just throw them into the comments, and I'll be interacting with you all the entire time. So my honorable mentions, like I said, The Defenders and Luke Cage, both comic book shows. But my number 10 is pure sci-fi. And I think it's a really, really fascinating premise. The premise of this show is fantastic. I haven't seen season 2 yet. Season 2 just came out a couple weeks ago. Season 1 was really, really good. It's pretty confusing though. Like some sci-fi gets pretty esoteric. And that is Altered Carbon. Altered Carbon comes in at number 10 for me. It's also very adult. If you want to watch your sci-fi with your kiddos, like probably Altered Carbon is not the thing that you're going to be watching. But the central premise and the what if question is, what if our bodies could be exchanged for other bodies and our consciousness could be downloaded into different bodies over time? So your consciousness stays alive and you can just interact with different bodies. In fact, different characters will enter different bodies at different times. Great concept, total sci-fi concept. So Altered Carbon comes in at number 10. Altered Carbon is a really interesting show. I believe Monty Thigpen, who's not here in the chat but is oftentimes interacting with us, is the one that recommended that show to me. Coming in at number 9, another pure sci-fi show. A time travel show. Now, I have written time travel in the past, so I tend to be fairly critical of time travel because there's a lot of pitfalls with time travel. In this time travel show, Travelers, it's really compelling. There's quite a bit of action. It's done pretty well. But in this show, they do time travel a little different in that people don't like enter a time travel machine and time travel into the past. They actually take over someone from the past. So it's almost like Altered Carbon where you're transferring your conscious to another body. But in this case, people from the future are transferring their consciousness back in the past through time and taking over other people's bodies, which is, again, a really good concept, a very decent sci-fi concept. So check out Travelers. It's much more family friendly. It's probably a PG rating. at least through the first couple of seasons. I think it was on a different channel before it was on Netflix. Maybe it was USA, I want to say, something along those lines. So far less adult, more family friendly all the way through. Um, number number 8 for best sci-fi TV shows on Netflix. I told you I was going to throw some fantasy in here. I told you I was going to throw some comic book shows in here. This is my first fantasy show that I'm throwing in there, and it is The Witcher. So The Witcher is The Witcher's not a great show. The Witcher's a good show. But I think for a lot of us who love fantasy, we were watching Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones was a great show. But once Game of Thrones ended, and it didn't end real well, the last season of Game of Thrones was probably the weakest season by far. That gave us a need for more fantasy shows. And so we were looking for fantasy shows. Netflix goes, hey, guess what? Henry Cavill as The Witcher. And I think pretty much all of us were like, yeah, we're in. The Witcher, I will warn you, is a little bit, first of all, it's very adult. It's Game of Thrones style adult. It's rated MA. Whenever I say it's adult, all I mean is it's rated MA. So be careful. If you're not, you can't just turn it on with your family and be like, oh, here we go. Let's eat dinner and watch The Witcher. But I will say that it is pretty fun. It's a pretty fun show. So if you enjoy fantasy, I recommend The Witcher. I would, going in, know that it takes place over some different timelines. And I didn't know that for a couple shows, and I was very confused about what was going on. So I think I think The Witcher is actually going to get better as time goes on, because they're going to get better at, the people are going to get more familiar with what's going on in terms of the show itself, and it's going to get better and better as time goes on. So that comes in at number 8, The Witcher. Number 7, my number 7 show, going over to comic books this time, and that is Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones, I believe it's also rated TV MA. I believe all the Marvel shows on Netflix are they feel like they are PG-13, except violent, which is oftentimes I think why they get the MA rating. Jessica Jones is not a character that I was familiar with at all before the television series came out. I did not know that what she was all about or what she did. I knew she was sort of a detective. I will say the casting in this show is fantastic. Kristen Ritter as Jessica Jones is phenomenal. And the Netflix Marvel shows, for the most part, there's a couple exceptions, but were done really, really well. So highly recommend, if you haven't checked out Jessica Jones yet, something that you can definitely binge, especially if you're self-isolating and staying at home. Jessica Jones is a great show to take a look at. Coming in at number 6 is another Marvel Netflix show, and that is The Punisher. The Punisher is by far the most violent of the Marvel Netflix shows. It's very much like the comic book, which is also super, super violent. But it's well done. It's very well done. I tend to not agree with the central premise of why the Punisher is doing what he's doing. But the show usually pits him up with some other characters who question what he's doing, and it makes it a little easier to watch, quite frankly. So definitely check out The Punisher if you haven't seen it yet. Be aware, though, it is super, super violent. So pausing before I get into my top 5, Jim Baldwin says, in no particular order, Dark Matter, which I haven't seen Dark Matter, so I need to definitely check that out. If you've seen Dark Matter, let me know in the comments. There's Dark Matter, and then Star Trek Original and the Next Generation. And then he also has Lost in Space. Now, I will tell you that I have seen one episode of Lost in Space, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. A lot of times I watch the shows I watch with my wife, and my wife and I try and figure out, do we both like this enough to keep watching it? So Lost in Space, we both liked, but we didn't love. And there's so much content out there that it's hard to catch up with everything. And so we moved on to another show. But I did like Lost in Space a lot. So that's a great recommendation, Jim. And of course, Star Trek is classic. And of course, Jim is bringing up Star Trek because Jim's a big Star Trek guy. So definitely check those out. Another show that I've tried, I think this is actually on Amazon Prime. So just something else that you can be aware of. I tried The Expanse, and people love The Expanse. The Expanse has just a following. It's like Doctor Who level following. I thought it was good. I think if I were to watch it for longer, I would eventually become one of those diehard fans. But again, there's so much content for me to catch up with, and people are always referring me to more content, and so I had to drop it. So I'm going to get into the top 5 on Netflix. The last thing Jim said was Another Life was a bit odd, so it's another one you can check out. Another Life on Netflix. So back to Netflix. Back to my top 5. This one is not fair. I'm going to be honest with you right off the bat. This show is not fair for me to pick, because it's about geeks. It's about people who are geeks like me, but it's not really science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's not even comic book, but it's adjacent to all of those. And I had to put it in here because it's such a good show. And during a pandemic, it is hilarious and you should watch it. And that is the IT Crowd. If you have not seen the IT Crowd, you have to watch the IT Crowd. The IT Crowd has a show, and I think it's like season 3. There's only like 4 seasons of it, I believe, 4 or 6 seasons, something like that. There's not a lot of episodes of it. It is one of the funniest episodes of TV that I have ever seen in my entire life. So definitely check out the IT Crowd. It is well worth your time, well worth your energy to pour some into that show. And it's on Netflix, and it's great for streaming because you can watch several at a time. So definitely check out the IT Crowd. It's a cheat because it's more like about people like us, or about people who like science fiction, fantasy, and comic books. Not as much science fiction, fantasy, or comic book itself, but still, you should watch it. Now for number 4. Number 4 is probably one of the more controversial shows on my list because I've heard a lot of people say that they didn't like it, but I liked it a lot. At first, I thought it might be actually one of my top 5 favorite shows, regardless of science fiction, regardless of fantasy. I thought it was going to be one of my top shows of all time. And that is The Umbrella Academy. So if you haven't seen The Umbrella Academy is really quirky, but the production design is really good. The acting is phenomenal. There's really cool cast of different kinds of characters with all different kinds of things going on. There's time travel elements. There's one character that's a talking, walking chimpanzee, and he's like brilliant. So it's just worth the watch. It's worth the watch. So yeah, that comes in at number 4. Before I get to my top 3, Jim also says the 4400 and the Shannara Chronicles. He's only watched the first season, but he did like it. So he's throwing out those recommendations as well. The 4400, which I have not seen the 4400, and I always pass the Shannara Chronicles and wonder if I should watch it because I'm always looking for good fantasy, but I have not seen that one in particular. Mary says Black Mirror. I know a lot of people love Black Mirror. A lot of people also who do love Black Mirror say it's kind of like episode to episode, whether or not it's good or not. I've seen several episodes that were very good. It's a very sci-fi heavy show, a lot of heavy topics being dealt with. Not always safe for the whole family. Usually it's a pretty adult, but it's very, people really love it. So it's kind of like the modern day Twilight Zone. Also, the Umbrella Academy, which I just mentioned, so that comes in at my number 4. It's on Mary's list as well. She also, just like Jim, references Dark Matter and Lost in Space. So there's some more recommendations for you, even though I haven't necessarily seen all of them. That's why I love doing the live shows. That's why I love having you guys watch the live shows so that you can give your opinions as well. Now, my number 3 is probably not sci-fi, but it definitely fits into the fantasy category. And it is actually one of my favorite shows in the history of television. I think that this show was really well done. It's a shame because it ended early and it rushed its 3rd season. The first season and the second season was probably the not the worst, but you know what I mean? It's like the one I didn't like the most of the 3. But yeah, Penny Dreadful. If you haven't seen Penny Dreadful, the acting is phenomenal. Timothy Dalton, Eva Green, I believe her name is. Phenomenal cast all around, just magnificent. It's about some of the universal monsters, the Frankensteins. They tackle ghosts and they tackle demons and vampires and all these things, right? It's set in the Victorian era setting, so they're not bringing those characters to our modern day or something. They're actually set in that time frame. And it is just really, really, really good. Really good. So definitely go back and watch Penny Dreadful. It is, again, TVMA. not for the whole family. It's also pretty scary at times. I'm not a horror movie or a horror TV show person. I can't watch Haunting of Hill House because it freaks me out too much. But this is free. It freaked me out, but I had to keep watching because it was so good and so fascinating. I think too many people are sleeping on Penny Dreadful. So if you like horror, even a little bit, definitely check out Penny Dreadful. And the way that it wraps up is really artful, despite the fact that it had a short season. So they kind of knew that they were going to get canceled, and they did some things. I'm hoping that it comes back with the same cast and the same crew and everything, and gets more TV out there. But we'll see. I don't know. Now, in the comments, I have a tie for number one. So I don't have a 2 and a 1. I have a tie for number one. Jim and Mary just mentioned them both, and that is Stranger Things and Daredevil. Top 2 fantasy, sci-fi, comic book TV shows on Netflix. You cannot go wrong with either of these shows. Stranger Things has an amazing cast, an amazing premise. It used to be that I would have said that Daredevil was my favorite far and away. Daredevil and then Stranger Things close behind it. The thing is that Stranger Things season 3 was so good, better than season 2, I thought. So obviously season 1 I think is my favorite, but then it goes season 1, season 3, season 2. Stranger Things, awesome. But before season 3 came, Daredevil season is extraordinary. Season 2 is even better, and then season 3 is maybe a little less good than season 1 and 2. And when I say that, I'm just comparing the two. They're all great. But Stranger Things came back with season 3, and now they're just tied. I can't pick one over the other. They're both so good, so good. So that is my entire list. If you're looking for some shows that are not science fiction and not fantasy and not comic book related, which is not really what the Story Geeks talk about. We're always talking about science fiction, fantasy, and comic books. But if you do want some shows that don't fit that vibe, and you do have Netflix and you want to watch something else, then I would definitely recommend Breaking Bad, which is one of the best television shows in history, and its spinoff, which is also one of the best television shows in history. I don't get a chance to talk about them very much because we don't talk about that on our show, but also Better Call Saul. Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, both very adult again, but really good. Stranger Things is getting into that teen. By the way, just so you have the reference for it, Stranger Things is getting into that teen area. You're probably safe if you're with your teenage kids to watch that. I don't have kids, so I don't have to worry about that very often. And I'm also not very good at recommending to you who should watch it and who shouldn't because I don't have the context. But Stranger Things, I think, is a little bit more family friendly. Probably not for little kids because it'll probably scare them. But Daredevil is probably okay for teens, though I think it is rated MA for violence. So just FYI. Just some other shows that Jim and Mary have thrown out that are on some other networks as well. Amazon Prime has Eureka and Warehouse 13. I've heard some really good things about both of those. Have seen only a little bit of Eureka, I think. And then Mary mentions Dexter, which was, of course, one of the more classic primetime TV shows in recent history. So that's my list. I mean, that's 20 minutes of time spent talking about sci-fi and fantasy on Netflix. There's a bunch more stuff on Netflix. There's a lot of CW shows that are on there. I've never been a big fan of any of the CW shows. I've tried Gotham. I've tried The Flash. I got the furthest in Arrow because I think Arrow had some compelling moments to it. But I would say that those are good shows in my opinion, but they're not necessarily great shows to the point where I'm so glued to the TV that I just can't leave. So that gives you a little bit of my list. I hope that you guys enjoyed that. Yeah, if you're watching this show later, please leave your best shows from TV, some sci-fi, fantasy, and even if you like some of the shows that I put out there, by the way, let me know too, because I want to know what you're up to and what you're watching. And we can use some of our podcasts off of these things as well if you let us know to do that. Speaking of podcasts, we just had a podcast come out today called How Movies Teach Us to Act. We should act in a pandemic. Since we're in a pandemic, it seemed like something we should talk about. So check that out in the Story Geeks podcast channel. You can just search the Story Geeks on any of your preferred future live shows of that podcast as well. That's just something that you can check out when you have time. Listen to it instead of just watching me ramble on. You can listen to us whenever you're doing whatever you're doing. The other thing I want to let you guys know about is the Story Geeks Facebook group. It's free to join. Just go search Facebook for the Story Geeks we'll let you in. It's a fantastic group. Jim and Mary are in there all the time, posting stuff. We're interacting with each other, letting each other know about the things that we're watching and the things that we're checking out. And then finally, if you want to become a VIP member of the Story Geeks Club, that you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/thestorygeeks. A bunch of tiers get you a bunch of extra bonus content, and it's just a really good way to support the show. We could use the extra support while we're in this pandemic mode that we find ourselves in right now. So anyways, thanks to everybody today for watching. Special thanks to Mary and Jim for throwing out some suggestions as well. And I will catch you guys on the next live show. If there's a specific type of live show that you want to recommend that I do, maybe I should do a Disney Plus top 10 things to watch on Disney Plus show. I could do that too. Let me know in the comments down below, and I will do that pretty soon within the coming weeks. Trying to present you guys with as much content as we possibly can in this pandemic time frame where we're all kind of stuck at home. By the way, you should stay home. Don't go out. Just stay home. We don't want to get everybody sick. Don't do that. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks for checking this out. I'll talk to you later.